3,000 years ago, an empire tried to erase a symbol from existence. They buried entire cities to stop it, but it survived. Tonight, 40 meters beneath Beijing, that same symbol is being embedded into a global smartphone update. In 12 hours, 1 billion screens will light up at once. And when they do, something older than civilization will awaken inside the human mind. This is the moment the quarantine ends. This is the moment history fractures. And this time, there will be nothing left to bury. 40 meters beneath Beijing, in a sealed archive where the air tastes of ozone and centuries ground to dust, a curator of ancient manuscripts sits at a dimly lit table. Cold sweat traces his temples. Before him, spread across the surface like the fragments of some vast and terrible mosaic, lie 142 oracle shells from the Shang dynasty, each more than 3,000 years old. Ordinarily, the cracks scorched into bone by heated bronze rods recount routine matters, weather, harvests, the fortunes of a military campaign. But tonight, having assembled the fragments from a recently classified excavation, the curator sees something that chills his blood. The fractures converge into the same intricate, unnervingly symmetrical character, one that has been ruthlessly erased from every historical chronicle and dictionary ever compiled. In the gloom, the symbol seems to pulse, radiating a primitive, animal dread that academic scholarship has carefully concealed from the world. He tells himself it is coincidence, a trick of light and exhaustion. He removes his glasses, rubs the bridge of his nose, and painstakingly rearranges the shards, cross-checking catalog numbers, accession logs, clearance seals. 142 fragments, too many for accidental symmetry. The fissures, the zigzag scorch marks, the minute chips along every edge align with terrifying precision, as though some ancient hand had left a message intended for whoever might one day piece it together again. Nothing disturbs the archive but the low hum of ventilation and the occasional click of humidity controls. Thick concrete walls, reinforced with layers of lead and composite alloys, were built to shield fragile relics from time and the outside world. Yet now they seem to be holding something else inside, a silence too dense, too taut, as if the air itself were listening. He opens the digital catalog and enters the symbol's parameters, forcing himself into the methodical rhythm of his training. The database returns nothing. Not a single trace of such a structure exists in the digitized lexicons or reconstructed corpora of Shang inscriptions. And yet memory insists he has seen this outline before, not whole, only in fragments, in a report sealed years ago under an internal directive.
That document had mentioned a forbidden mark, allegedly linked to a series of divinations that foretold neither drought nor war, but something else entirely, an event for which the ancient language possessed no safe term. The priests who burned their questions into shell had done so with an urgency that bordered on despair, and the answers, according to marginal notes buried deep in the restricted archive, had forced the royal court to make a decision whose consequences rippled through all subsequent history. Slowly, the curator traces a fingertip along one of the cracks. Beneath his skin, he feels the faintest ridge, like a scar on old flesh. For an instant, he is certain the symbol pulses, not with light, but with presence. And if it was once struck from every record, it was not out of superstition, it was out of necessity. Some questions once posed to the world do not fade. They resonate across millennia, waiting to be reassembled from fragments. For 72 hours, the scholar does not leave the bunker. He sleeps in snatches, his head slumped against the desk, waking to the sound of his own ragged breathing, before returning to the screen and the scattered shells. The cold glare of the lamps leaches the color from his skin, rendering it ashen, his fingers unnaturally thin, as though he too were becoming an artifact, preserved 40 meters underground. Step by step, he peels back the monumental falsehood upon which an entire civilization has rested. The character does not signify the wrath of heaven, nor the will of gods, nor even death itself. When broken down into its most ancient roots, phonetic and visual alike, it resolves into a chillingly precise expression. Mind devourers. Not metaphor, not poetry. A direct attempt by Shang-era priests to name a phenomenon for which their language was never meant to be sufficient. The strokes mirror the branching structure of neural pathways, and the central line, subtly bent, matches an archaic pictogram once used to denote distortion, an aberration, a fracture in what should remain whole. He cross-references this with excavation reports from Yingshu. Tens of thousands of decapitated, bound bodies, uncovered in mass graves, have long been interpreted as ritual offerings to ancestors or displays of imperial authority. But marginal notes, hidden in restricted files, suggest something else. Too many corpses, too systematic the bindings, too hurried the burials. This was not sacrifice, it was containment. The earliest emperors were not divine sovereigns, they were executioners, ruthless and desperate, attempting to halt an outbreak of collective madness by isolating and interring entire settlements. The deeper he ventures into the ancillary texts, the stronger the nausea rises. The Shang curse was not transmitted through water, blood, or the bite of an animal. It was linguistic, a cognitive trap embedded in the geometry of the forbidden sign itself. A single glance at its precise structure, or the exact articulation of its sound, was enough to trigger an irreversible alteration in the brain. Not mystical, but biological. A cascading reaction that warped perception and eroded the higher functions of the cortex. Those infected did not lose their humanity in body, only in behavior. They clawed at their own flesh as if trying to tear the alien pattern from within. They descended into feral violence. They clustered together with one compulsive drive, to propagate the sign. Later chronicles, meticulously revised by successive dynasties, describe a wave of the possessed sweeping across the plains, followed by a terse declaration of the restoration of heavenly order. Now he understands the cost of that order. The rigid codes of ancestor worship, the intricate rituals, the taboos surrounding certain scripts, all of early Eastern mythology had been constructed with a single aim: to erase the memory of the symbol, to teach fear of the past, to enforce obedience to canon, to make repetition safer than inquiry. Fear became a tool of sanitation, tradition a mechanism of collective amnesia. He leans back and closes his eyes, but the sign burns on in the darkness behind them. Clean lines, perfect symmetry. If ancient rulers truly managed to stop the contagion, then a method once existed. And if the symbol has now been reassembled from 142 fragments, then the quarantine that endured for more than 3 millennia may have ended the moment he allowed himself to study it too closely. The silence in the archive thickens, turning viscous, pressing against his eardrums as if the 40 meters of earth above him have suddenly doubled. The air, scrubbed clean by filters and dehumidifiers, feels painfully sterile, yet a new tang creeps into it, metallic, like the faint scent that follows a cut. The curator lifts his head and studies the corners of the room. Where orderly shadows once lay between the shells, he glimpses indistinct, twitching shapes, as though the darkness itself is learning to move. He tries to blame exhaustion. 72 hours without real sleep is more than enough for the mind to turn treacherous. But the symptoms unfold with unnerving precision, each one catalogued in the oblique chronicles he had reviewed, never realizing he was reading his own sentence. First, the intrusive image, then the distortion of sound, then the sensation of something foreign lodged inside his thoughts. The geometry of the cursed sign has burned itself into his retinas. Every time he blinks, fractured lines flare along the inner surface of his eyelids, glowing a deep arterial red. They are not static, they pulse, shifting proportions, as if refining themselves, correcting minor flaws left by the ancient hand that carved them, or the modern eye that reconstructed them. When he closes his eyes, the symbol appears more vividly under the lamp. When he opens them, the cracks in the shelves no longer rest on the table, but seem fused into his sight. The hum of the ventilation begins to unravel into whispers. At first, it resembles the rush of blood in his ears. Then rhythm emerges, intonation, compressed consonants of an archaic tongue. Thousands of voices layered atop one another, repeating the same question once seared into turtle shell. He cannot distinguish the words, but he understands the demand. Continuation. Dissemination. His fingers drift across the polished surface of the desk. At first, the motion is nervous, unconscious. Then his nails bite into the lacquered wood, and he realizes he is carving the familiar contour. A downward stroke, a sharp break to the right, an intersection, a mirrored answering line. The pain comes late. Skin beneath his nails tears, warmth smears across the desk, mingling with the dust of ancient bone. Still his hand does not stop. It moves with a motor impulse older than will. He tries to pull back, to clench his fist, to press his fingers against his chest, but his muscles tremble and extend again. On the smooth surface, a crimson, uneven character emerges, imperfect, distorted, yet unmistakable. The whispering swells into a chorus, not a scream, not a threat. An ancient fracture in the human genome, dormant for over 3 millennia, awakens, not as illness, but as code. In a sudden, lucid instant, he understands. The mutation does not annihilate the self at once. It divides it, creating within the mind an additional layer, an observer, a corrector, one who ensures the sign is reproduced with absolute fidelity. Images flare before him, not hallucinations, but fragments of inherited memory. The dust-choked streets of Yingsu, bound figures with vacant eyes, their lips still shaping the forbidden word in silence. Soil cascading onto faces that offer no resistance, because resistance is already meaningless. Emperors standing at the edges of pits, stripped of divine aura, mere administrators of catastrophe, buying time. The curator knows there is no time left. The symbol, assembled from 142 fragments, is no longer an archival object. It is an active pattern etched into his neural circuits. If ancient rulers tried to halt the contagion with fire and earth, its next spread will take another route, through digital catalogs, through reports, through his own notes. The shadows in the corners take another step forward, or perhaps it is he who steps toward them. His mind fights with its last reserves, clinging to the remnants of professional discipline, to preservation guidelines, access protocols, the dry language of official reports that once seemed a reliable barrier between order and chaos. An inner voice, still carrying the inflections of his former self, pleads with him, burn the bones, erase the files, seal the reinforced door of the archive from the inside. He understands with terrifying clarity what will happen if this visual pattern reaches the outside world, if it is digitized, replicated, embedded in a lecture slide or academic paper. Modern civilization will collapse within weeks, drowning in a tide of madness and violence. Humanity, armed with networks, satellites, and instantaneous transmission, will turn the planet into a slaughterhouse, surpassing even the darkest nightmares of the first emperors who once buried entire cities to buy a single generation of safety. He can almost see it, screens across the globe igniting with the sign, millions of eyes absorbing its geometry, algorithms replicating the image at inhuman speed, unaware of what they are spreading. No quarantine, no firewall, no emergency directive would act quickly enough. What once required priests and red-hot irons would now travel through fiber-optic cables in fractions of a second. The curator rises slowly, as if his body were filled with lead. Each step toward the shelving unit where restoration chemicals are stored demands effort. He knows the solvent could reduce bone to soft pulp, erase the scorched lines, obliterate the network of cracks. Fire would finish the work, leaving nothing but charred fragments stripped of meaning. From a scientific standpoint, it would be barbarism. From the standpoint of history, the only possible mercy. He reaches for the metal canister of solvent, fingers slipping against its cold surface. In his other hand, a lighter, small, almost absurd in the sterile hush of the room. For one trembling moment, he believes he can still end it. Break the chain within himself, become the last bearer of the sign and its final executioner. Seal the curse inside these 40 meters of concrete and steel. Then the whispering in his mind fuses into a single, deafening hum. No longer countless fragmentary voices, a monolith of sound, low and vibrating, as though the very structure of his brain resonates with an alien frequency. There are no words in it, yet the meaning is mercilessly clear. Destruction is another form of transmission. Prohibition is the most potent catalyst for curiosity. Ashes will be analyzed, samples taken, reports written. Even absence will become a question someone will feel compelled to ask again. The flame flares for a fraction of a second and dies, as if the air itself refuses to sustain it. The lines carved into the desk with his own blood darken, deepening, acquiring a dreadful clarity. He realizes he is no longer the sole author of his decisions. Inside him resides an observer, cold, methodical, assessing risks by a different calculus entirely. The armored door of the archive feels impossibly distant. Sealing it from within would require codes, confirmations, system entries. Every action leaves a digital trace. Any attempt at destruction would be documented. The hum intensifies, synchronizing with his heartbeat. And within that rhythm emerges a new thought, not of salvation, but of dissemination, subtler and more refined than any crude blaze. The canister lowers slowly to the floor. The lighter slips from his fingers and clicks softly as it goes out for good. In the sterile silence of the archive, a decision is born that requires no fire. An unnatural, almost tender smile spreads across the scholar's face. The pain in his torn fingers no longer registers as warning. It feels like confirmation, that the process is complete, that resistance has broken. He lowers himself into the chair before the computer connected to the central government network and pauses, studying his reflection in the darkened screen. The exhaustion is gone. So is doubt. What remains is focus, cold, deliberate, almost ceremonial. With blood-streaked fingertips, he begins digitizing the geometry of the forbidden character. First, a rough outline, then adjustments to proportion, angles refined, symmetry corrected. He works with manic precision, as if every year spent in the archive has been preparation for this exact moment. Lines once scorched into bone by heated bronze rods 3,000 years ago become a flawless vector file, stripped of cracks and accidental imperfections. What was once an uneven trace of fire transforms into immaculate digital form, capable of infinite scaling without distortion. The hum inside his mind recedes, replaced by clarity. He no longer sees an ancient artifact before him. He sees a tool. The linguistic virus encoded in its geometry must be rendered with absolute fidelity,
Anything less, and the mutation will fail to reach its full expression. He adjusts the thickness of strokes, calibrates the balance of negative space and intersections. Every pixel is aligned to echo the rhythm now pulsing through his own neural circuitry. Instead of sealing the archive, instead of erasing the data and becoming the final casualty of the quarantine, the curator chooses another path. Consumed by a madness that no longer feels like illness, he embeds the cognitive virus into the code of an impending mandatory update to the national operating system. Access at this level is a rare convergence of academic authority and state infrastructure, a privilege of his clearance. He opens the internal module where visual elements are reviewed before mass deployment and inserts the symbol into an inconspicuous fragment of the startup sequence. It will appear for less than a second, a brief flicker between the logo and the loading bar. No one will linger on an unfamiliar graphic flashing during reboot. But that is enough. It takes only one mind to register the exact geometry. And when the viewers number not one, but millions, the effect will multiply beyond calculation.
12 hours until the quarantine, sustained for more than 30 centuries, collapses. Once, priests could isolate a village. Emperors could order a city buried beneath earth. Now the contagion will travel through glass and light, through silicon and current. He imagines it already. People blinking at their screens, the sudden stillness in offices and living rooms. Then the first tremors, the first cries. Communication networks choking on incoherent messages. Soldiers, police officers, physicians, all exposed to the same pattern. A civilization proud of its rationality and technological supremacy, turning upon itself with a fury unknown even in its darkest ages. He saves the file, initiates the final verification, and without hesitation confirms integration. The system accepts the changes without resistance. A concise notification appears. Update package successfully prepared. Mundane, efficient, almost dull, as though he has approved nothing more consequential than a cosmetic interface tweak. The curator leans back and closes his eyes. Over the centuries, humanity forgot what it had tried to conceal. It built cities of steel and glass, bound continents with cables, split the atom and rewrote its own genome, yet never learned how to defend itself against a pattern that once forced emperors to become gravediggers of their own people. Now that pattern returns, not from beneath the earth, but from the heart of the network. And when, in 12 hours, the glow of screens washes over billions of faces, the ancient question burned into turtle shells will at last receive its final answer, not in words, but in flesh.